Okay, so I just found this subreddit and I can't get enough of it. Reading through all the personal accounts of high strangeness provoked me to share one of my own. I grew up in rural eastern Iowa. Farm country, fields, woods, small-ass towns. I don't remember many, if any, talking about paranormal encounters in the community. But I had plenty growing up in that area, sometimes alone, other times while with family or friends. This encounter happened sometime around 2005. I was a freshman in high school and my older sister was a senior. We would often carpool since I couldn't drive yet, and it was a good 20 minutes to the town our school was in. It was autumn, and probably a Friday night. There had been a football game and my sister was driving us home after it wrapped up. Also in the car were two neighbor girls who lived in the area, and my best friend who was coming out to spend the weekend. I say out because I grew up on a large family farm fairly removed from my town. Although there were plenty of neighbors. The landscape in that part of Iowa consists of rolling hills, Grant Wood country, and gravel roads. No street lights for miles, just yard lights at each farm in the area. The night was dark, and I remember it being warm. From what I recall, we were all jabbering and laughing and probably had the radio blaring. My sister was driving with her best friend in the passenger seat. I was in the back seat driver's side. My best friend was in the middle back, and the other neighbor girl was also in the back seat passenger side. It was a big suburban type thing. Like I said, all the roads are gravel in that area and fairly hilly. We came down over a hill that ends in a T intersection. Because it's gravel and on a downward slope, we would always slow way the hell down at that particular point. If you don't, your car would just slide forward on the gravel into the field. So needless to say, we were going fairly slow. We made a right turn heading south to drop off the neighbors. And that is when we saw them. Crossing the road were two large, vaguely humanoid figures. My sister slammed on the brakes, and for a few moments that lasted an eternity, and they were clearly visible. Illuminated in the headlights. They were two distinct figures, but they didn't really have any hard edges. It sounds weird, but they were humanoid and moved like two humans, somewhat quickly with limbs swaying, arms and legs, but also slow, kind of like they hovered or floated across the road. Visually, they were enveloped in a dense fog that glowed and shone from our headlights, like when a light beam hits smoke or dust or fog. Their cores were more dense and they dissipated outward from there, visually fading. They were very tall, I'd say around 12 foot based on our eye level inside the Suburban. From what seemed like a long time, but I'm sure it was just a matter of seconds, we watched them move up and out of the ditch, on the right side of the road, cross, and then enter into the other side, moving from right to left and disappearing into the darkness. The second they were gone, we all erupted in screams and my sister gunned it. Both my sister and her friends in the front seat had seen them, as well as myself and friend in the back middle. The only one who missed it was the girl in the back on the passenger side who was looking out the side window as it happened. When we slammed on the brakes and started screaming, she was like, "What's happening?" Because of that time dilation and her not noticing, it makes me think that it happened very fast. We all described what we had seen, and each person related a similar description to what I detailed above. Now, I've been fairly interested in accounts of high strangeness, cryptids, and the paranormal for most of my life, but I've never encountered a story similar to this one. The closest I've heard was on an episode of Mysterious Universe when they were interviewing a researcher about crop circles, and she mentioned seeing two towering figures glowing and enveloped by the fog, running across the field. They also kind of reminded me of the scene from Prometheus when the astronauts trigger the projections on the engineer ship, and it shows a recording of two of them running down a hallway. That movie came out several years after this encounter, and I got the chills in theaters during that scene. I have other encounter stories, one even in the same exact spot, but nothing like this one. Looking forward to sharing more in the future. I hope you all like the recollection, and I would like to hear other similar encounters if they're out there. I live in southeastern Georgia, and occasionally while driving at night, I've seen these fairly tall, Around 6'2" with knees slightly bent, emaciated creatures with skin that looks like it was charred on the grill, leaving it covered in oil and black grit/flecks. I can't remember their faces because the images of the rake look close enough to replace it in my memory. It seems to mildly match the description of crawlers that I've seen on this sub, but I've only ever seen them bipedal. I've seen these creatures 3 times, and these sightings are the only times I've felt real fear. And I've only seen them while driving and at night. The most notable time was the first one, while I was driving friends home with a full car. I round a corner to see what I've just described standing in the road directly in front of my car, and understandably freaked out. I blinked my eyes as a reflex as I hit the brakes. When my eyes opened, we had passed right through where it was, and it was nowhere to be seen. I wasn't the only one to see it either. And after a second had passed in disbelief, the second we mentioned this thing out loud, I got an extreme feeling that we were being followed, doing 80 on winding back roads. I figured there wasn't much else to do, as I had to get a pair of siblings home in minutes as they had a strict curfew, and we were already late. As we reached about 4/5 of the way there, the feeling of danger went from behind me to in front of me. And sure enough, there was a limping munchkin cat or kitten, its legs were barely 3 inches long, that was walking down the street parallel to the yellow line, exactly where my front left tire would have been. I managed to swerve out of the way as the cat just kept walking without change, and it was too dark to see if it moved after we passed. Before that night, I had never had problems with any animal in front of my car while driving for almost a year without it happening, but since then, almost 3 years later, I have animals almost committing suicide every week. And occasionally I feel that feeling again, usually when I drive that same road, as if I'm being followed. The second encounter was the scariest. I was again driving someone home in the same area as the other 2. I didn't know him that well, but people knew where I was going. Halfway there, I could already feel that I was being followed, but I'd gotten used to that. I had never been to those parts of the woods before, but as soon as I got close enough, just being in that area gave me the only time I had ever felt true fear for my life. As if just the consciousness of the woods outmatched a human one. It felt like a hive mind. After conveying this to my passenger, who confirmed nighttimes there have had scary occurrences, but not elaborating much, I pulled into his driveway, pulling up to his door as close as I could, as his house was in a very wooded area and I didn't want him to walk too far. He made it inside, but as I was backing up to leave, I could feel the initial creature looking at me from behind, and then I saw in front of me a second one that was bigger than the first one, which I saw running behind a stand-up shelter. Basically a roof with no walls, and it was fast. Even with my adrenaline pumping, it seemed to be going 25 to 30 miles per hour. Suddenly, the feeling of danger rose to the point I felt I was in immediate danger, and that there were more than these 2. I tore through his dirt driveway back onto the dirt road entrance, and as soon as I turned out of the driveway, a dog jumped from a completely brush-covered ledge 5 foot above the road. There was a house in the direction it came from, but it had a fence around it, and I don't think even a toddler could have fit through those vines. And this dog was at least 3'5". It didn't chase my car or anything, it just stood there in the center of the road and barked at my car. As I was already too close to it to stop, I had to swerve around it. As I passed it, it just stared without barking, but I didn't dare look at it for more than an instant. I don't think I came to a full stop the whole way home, which was a good 20 minutes away. Thankfully, the third time was very far away. I just turned my brights on a curve, again after dropping a friend off, and saw the same shape again. 1,200 feet off, but instead of a charred gray, this one was a bright white. It was too quick to see anything else. This time maybe 3 to 6 miles away from the other 2 miles apart. I have seen multiple animals that walk alongside the road as I pass, some disfigured and some moving slower than they should. I've even run across some scattered bones occasionally, The worst was on the way to church. I came to an end of one road to turn onto another on the route that I always take. There were 4 to 7 dead birds lying around the white line all across the right lane, just at the stop sign, so that you have to enter the left lane to go around them. On my way back, 3 hours later, at 8 at night, they were all gone. Not a trace of blood or anything. In a discussion with a friend during the first encounter, we settled on calling it a skinwalker due to the connection with the kitten, and that the aggressive behavior only started once we spoke about it. So I was about 10 when this happened, and it was the middle of the night, so please forgive me if all the memories are kind of fuzzy. It was the middle of the night, close to 3 a.m. My Great Dane, Annie, had to go use the bathroom, so I let her out back and waited by the door because it was very cold that night. I waited for a good 10 minutes before I started to hear her barking, which she never does. So I started to get a little worried and, like a dumbass, I got my jacket from my room and went to go get her. Now, to lay out my backyard, we have an off-ground porch and half an acre of land, which is cleared off except for the back half, which had lots of trees. And then there's the fencing, which, if jumped, leads to the mountains. I live in Tennessee, which I think is important to add. I crossed my arms and called her name a few times. She's a black dog, so it was hard to see her, but she whined and rushed back to me, almost knocking me off my feet. She stood in front of me defensively, which she had never done before or after this night. She was growling deeply and put all of her weight against me. I petted her, trying to calm her down. She looked down at the open porch, which was probably a good 4 to 5 feet off the ground, and she was barking like crazy at this point. Spit was flying out of her mouth. I had never seen anything like this, and this is when I pulled my old iPhone out and turned on the flashlight, thinking I would see a rat or maybe something else. This is where the memories get all fuzzy, so I do apologize. There was a face, which was slim and had huge black eyes and a smirk. I couldn't remember its skin tone, but I want to say it was either gray or light brown. It had hair, which I think was blonde, and it was kind of slicked back, but it didn't look human. I screamed and quickly fell back, dropping my phone. I was about 6 feet away from the door, and once I got back up, I ran toward it and screamed for my dog. I heard a second whine, and when she rushed back to me, she had a slash over her neck. I slammed the door and locked it. I started to cry like crazy, and this is when my mom came down the hall shaking, and she had her pistol with her. Please note, we do live in a very rural area, and my dad works at night. She asked what happened, and I told her. She told me I was seeing things in the darkness and tried to tell me that Annie probably got into a fight with the raccoon. I didn't sleep that night or a few nights after. We took Annie to the vet the next day, and they had no idea what caused her wound. They asked if anyone would try to hurt her, and we said no. A few weeks later, I saw it again, but I remember this event way better, probably because I had nightmares about it for a week. It was around 5 this time. I had woken up early because me and my family were going to go on a trip. I had gotten up to get some milk to try to get an extra hour of sleep. At first, everything was normal before I heard tapping at the kitchen window. My blood went very cold, and it was so dark that I couldn't see what was at the window at first, even with the light on. I stood there, and it tapped for a few more seconds before just placing its hand on the window. It looked to be about my size, which is kind of small since I was only 5 foot at the time. I started to shake and slowly walked out of the kitchen, keeping the light on and my eyes on the window. Suddenly, it punched the window, making it crack. I screamed and ran back into my room and locked the door, screaming it was coming for me, and my little sister, whom I shared a room with. I hid under my blankets crying, and I fell back asleep for a little bit. Somehow, no one heard me that time, and I never told anyone about what happened that night. Of course, as we were leaving, my dad said something about the window, but he just thought it was because it was old and we replaced it once we got back. I've only seen it twice since then. Can someone please tell me what the hell I was seeing and if I should tell my grandpa who's a priest? And if anyone in Tennessee has had this happen to them as well. Well, thanks for reading and giving me any clues. Last year, when I was hanging out with some friends, I had the idea to watch some of those redacted videos with songs like Mr. Blue Sky playing over it. Well, one of my friends said he saw something that looked similar to something in the video. We live in northern Indiana, by the way. He said one night, maybe at 11 p.m. or so, friend 1 got a weird feeling. And he turned over in his bed and looked out the window. And to his surprise, there was something standing in the driveway of the house just across the street. He lives in the suburbs. He said it was about 8 foot tall, white, emaciated, and had no discernible features. Scared, he closed the blinds and tried to shake it off, but to make sure he wasn't hallucinating of tiredness, he checked again. And this time it was standing next to a pole in his yard, which isn't too far from his window. Here, he closed the blinds again and tried to go to sleep. A couple of months later, I went to another friend's house. At night, we talked about scary stuff and watched some videos, and I brought up that friend 1 saw a creature just a few months ago. Then friend 2 said he saw what might be the same creature. Now, he's the type to stay up until 5 a.m. playing games or watching shows, so one night about midnight, he went downstairs to make some food. Here, he looked out a window in his kitchen and saw that thing standing in the backyard 2 houses down. He lives downtown. He described it almost exactly the same. About 10 foot tall, white, emaciated, and no discernible features. But friend 2 said he actually saw it moving around, and he said it walked just like a normal person. Eventually, it stopped walking, and he said he didn't know if it was looking at him since it didn't really have any features. This scared him, so he ran back upstairs. After hearing both of them having seen possibly the same thing within a couple months, and within such a short distance from each other, it got me motivated to try to find any other sightings. I couldn't find anything except for some comments made in a subreddit a couple years ago. They are as follows. The first user said, "I have a friend who has had multiple sightings of a white, emaciated, tall man with no discernible features in northern Indiana." The second user said, "Do you have more info? I'm from that area and have seen it too. I found another sighting in Hobart, which is pretty close to my sighting. I'm curious to see if anyone else has seen it, and I'm curious to see what it is, be it an alien, skinwalker, or whatever it might be. I just wanted to add that they do live in 2 separate towns, and there's about 15 to 20 minutes drive between the 2. Friend 2 also asked a friend to sketch what he saw, and I'll post it as soon as I get it. When I was younger, about when I was 7 years old during the winter, I saw some things at my mother's place. I was always a believer in the paranormal, but I had never really seen anything bizarre or out of place. At least before the day that I finally did. It was about 6 a.m., and I was getting ready to go to school. I lived in the country, so I didn't have any neighbors close by, and so waiting for the bus was long and boring to me because I had no friends to pass the time with. It was still dark. The lights from the house were bright enough to let me see the yard and driveway, so I decided to play in the snow. I was making snowmen, snow angels, and I also was beginning to build a fort when suddenly I felt as if I was being watched. It was as if time stopped, and it got eerie. I slowly turned around and froze. I saw a woman walking on the edge of the house. That woman, she was all white, like paper white and glowing. She was wearing a long white dress. She had long white hair, and she was very attractive. But why would a woman be in a dress when it was that cold? She stopped at her 5th step and looked at me. Beautiful bluish white eyes, small nose, and full lips. She smiled, and I felt reassured, protected even. I had the courage to blink, and in an instant she was gone. I never saw her again, at least not in real life. That was the first encounter I had. The second encounter was not so fun, but still not very eventful. I was watching TV with my mom when I was in high school. I had the urge to go to the bathroom, so I did, but when I got in front of the door, a black cloud was blocking my way. I stared at it for at least a minute before it was gone. Nothing really happened, I just got spooked, but then in 2016 I had some friends over, and they were big-time believers. We were outside talking and watching the sky when I started hearing some Native American music and chanting. I asked my friends if they were hearing the same thing as me, and they were. So we decided to check it out. We found absolutely nothing, except some quick-moving shadows out of the corner of our eyes. And we were freaked out about it, so we decided to go inside. A couple of weeks later, we decided to look around the house again. That's when we saw shadow dogs. Red eyes piercing in the dark of their bodies. That's not even the worst of my encounters, honestly. The worst was when me and my mother saw the same thing at the same time. UFOs. We've been chased by them for 5 kilometers. Of course, we were in a car, but that was the worst thing I've experienced so far, and that was the thing that made me move from my mother's place. This is my dad's story, but I feel that it's fairly interesting. This is when he was a kid, by the way. My dad was a kid raised in the cities with his brother and mom, when his mom would bring him to her boyfriend's dad's house that was in the country. When my dad and his brother would bring them up, they would be gone, but one of the nights through the week that they were up, they saw this alien figure at the window, but the window was covered with a blanket, so they could only see the shadow of it. The next day, they went on as if nothing happened. That night, though, the exact same thing happened. My dad woke up his brother, and he saw it too. They had the idea to lift the blanket, and when they did, there was nothing there. But before they lifted it, they were sure it was there. They were obviously confused, but went back to bed. Now, a few years later, into his teen years, he's had a pain in his heel, and he had enough, so he cut open his heel and pulled out what appeared to be a microchip. But his brother never said anything about pain in his heel or anything. Hey there, friends! I hope you guys enjoyed this fantastic collection of humanoid/cryptid encounters. If you did enjoy it and would like content that is like this, but also vastly different, like comparing wallets to pianos, please consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you gotta do is hit that, subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, and that makes you part of the Nevermore. You can support the growth of the Nevermore by doing things like following me on Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook, or supporting me through Ko-fi and Patreon. Not a whole lot more to say other than I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. It's coming up pretty quick. Yeah. Like tomorrow quick. Alright. Yeah. I hope you guys have a great day. Fantastic weekend, and I'll see you on the next video. Until then, sleep well.